this morning comes from the Gospel according to John, chapter 10, beginning at verse 11. And here, Jesus is speaking. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. The word of the Lord. On February 26, 2012, in Sanford, Florida, Trayvon Martin was walking in the gated community where his father lived when he was seen by George Zimmerman, the community watch coordinator for the neighborhood. Had George Zimmerman known the facts, that Trayvon Martin was visiting his father and that he was an unarmed teenager, he would have probably taken no more notice of Trayvon. But George didn't know the truth. And when the events of that fateful day played out, George shot and killed Trayvon after an altercation between the two of them. Friends, must it always turn out this way? Must we always assume the worst about those we view as outsiders? Are our brains hardwired to immediately hold a bias against those who are different? Well, actually, the answer to this last question seems to be yes. Research demonstrates that the human brain is hardwired to seek and enjoy social groupings that often lead to what we might call tribalism. In explaining this research, the biologist Edward O. Wilson writes, people are prone to ethnocentrism. It is an uncomfortable fact that even when given guilt-free choices, individuals prefer the company of others of the same race, nation, clan, and religion. They trust them more, relax with them better in business and social events, and prefer them more often than not as marriage partners. They are quicker to anger at evidence that an out-group is behaving unfairly or receiving undeserved rewards. And they grow hostile to any out-group encroaching upon territory or resources of the in-group, unquote. Still, this automatic reaction of the brain doesn't necessarily dictate our response. In other studies, people who were shown pictures of persons of another race had, at first, the predicted reaction of bias automatically triggered in their brains. Yet when the facts were explained, such as one person being a doctor and another the patient, other areas of the brain where one reasons were activated and mitigated this automatic bias. We are not robots. We are not slaves to the automatic reactions of our brains. If we are willing to think, to reason, to ask questions in order to ascertain the facts, to seek the truth before we take action. Jesus, after all, calls on us to love God with our whole heart, soul, might, and mind, our whole mind, to think before we act. Yet that's the problem, isn't it? It is easier to go with the flow, to not question the appearance of things, but to accept our prejudices as the gospel truth and act on them without reflection. In so doing, how many times has the church turned its back and run from those whom Christ has called into his fold? And how many times has the church welcomed those who appear all right, but are in truth a wolf in sheep's clothing? Now, this is not an academic question. Christ knows that there are dangers in the world, that there are predators who stalk the sheep of his fold. Therefore, in his last days in Jerusalem, Jesus drew the attention of the wolves, the religious and political authorities, to himself and away from his followers. Jesus did this because he knows that his disciples are hired hands who will run from the wolves after he is arrested. They will run, and the followers of Jesus will be vulnerable, but they will be safe. They will not be snatched up by the wolves because Jesus has drawn the attention of the wolves to himself as the sole source of their cause, of the cause of their concern. And once these wolves, the religious and political authorities, have crucified Jesus, they will mistakenly believe that they have rid themselves of this Jesus movement. It will, of course, be wrong. But because Jesus focused the attention, the wolves' attention, on himself before he laid down his life for his sheep, they will be safe, at least for the moment. But what happens next? Who will be the leader, indeed the guardian of the sheep, once Jesus has ascended to the Father? Who will be the one to proclaim the gospel of Christ, so that the sheep who are not in the fold will hear his voice and come? Who? Peter. Peter, the hired hand, who saw the wolf coming and ran. Peter, the hired hand, who no doubt loved Jesus, but who did not love the sheep. Peter, the hired hand, who was in it to save himself and who fled when his personal safety was in danger. This hired hand, this disciple Peter, is the one who Jesus will later charge to, quote, tend my sheep, unquote. This hired hand who did not care for the sheep, the disciple Peter, is the rock on which Jesus will build his church. You see, Jesus, as the good shepherd, does not remove the wolf. Instead, Jesus gives Peter a second chance to follow his lead and face the wolf as he did. Peter will now have the opportunity to draw the attention of the religious and political authorities to himself, so that the church can thrive and call the sheep who are not yet in the fold. Jesus gives Peter a new lease on a new life. Friends, you too have another chance. In truth, we fully experience the forgiveness of Christ when we, like Peter, accept the new opportunities that we have been given in life to redeem our failures. Like Peter, we are often hired hands who come to the church because of our love and faith in Christ. But over time, Christ gives us every opportunity to love the sheep of the flock as much as he does, and invite the sheep who have not yet heard his voice to join. Every day you live is, in fact, another chance to accept this forgiveness of Christ, learn from your mistakes, and try again. There is only one good shepherd, Jesus Christ. But none of us has to stay on as hired hands who are only in it for ourselves. Instead, over time, when we are permeated by the love of God in Christ, the love of the Good Shepherd, his sacrifice for the flock can engender our own love, regardless of all sheep, regardless of their race, nationality, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomic status, political beliefs, or tribe. For there is only one flock, and there's only one shepherd. There is not one church for one race and another church for another. There is not one church for the wealthy and one for the poor. There is not one church for Trayvon Martin and one for George Zimmerman. There is only one church for all the sheep of Christ. And we are either part of that one church or we are not a church at all, just a self-deluded tribe. The church of Jesus Christ, therefore, never occurs naturally in the world like a weed would pop up anywhere. Instead, it is cultivated. It is cultivated like wheat. The church is an intentional work of those who seek to welcome all who Christ has called, and not just members of our own tribe. The church of Christ is the embassy of God's love on earth, where all who have faith in Christ can find a place of welcome regardless of their so-called tribe of origin. Of course, one does not have to look very far to realize how far the church of Jesus Christ has fallen short in fulfilling Christ's vision of a church without tribal borders. As is often pointed out, Sunday mornings during worship are the most segregated times of the week in our country. The lines of division include, but are not limited to, race, age, social and economic class, political affiliation, and nationality. Without intentional efforts to reach out to outsiders, churches are likely to remain more tribal than inclusive of all whom Christ loves. Yet, like Peter, we have been given another chance to learn to love all of God's sheep. We can think outside the tribe, particularly as we consider the continuing challenge of the tribal forces of our society, let alone the call of Christ. Our church has the impetus and the opportunity to cultivate one church under one shepherd. To do so, of course, the church has to carefully navigate our own brains, which, as we discussed above, are hardwired for bias against those who we consider to be outside of our own tribe. But again, we are not slaves to our reflexive biases, nor are we hired hands who are only in it for ourselves. Instead, we are sheep who have been loved by the shepherd, sheep who have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes, the mistakes of our past, prejudices, and love all of God's flock. Therefore, I believe that the church can challenge us all to think, to reason, to ask questions in order to ascertain the facts before we act, to love God with our whole mind, to seek the truth before we identify someone as a wolf. Likewise, I believe that the church can challenge each of us to reach out, to get to know, invite, and welcome all the sheep of Christ into his fold, regardless of their tribe of origin. It takes work. It takes work to dismantle our reflexive biases and build such a church. But I believe that by the grace of God, we can. Let all God's people say,